This conference is now being recorded.
Hello, and welcome to the New York State Association of School Business Officials webinar. Today's program is Get Ready, Preliminary Planning. Your host for today is Donna Clement, Director of Professional Development with New York State ASBO. Operator assistance is available at any time during this conference by pressing £0. A question and answer session will follow the presentation. You may send chat questions during the presentation using the chat window indicated by a speech bubble icon located to the right of the presentation. Please address chat questions to the Q&A group using a drop-down list located at the bottom of the chat window. Without further ado, I will now turn the call over to our host. Donna, please begin.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone to Capital Construction Projects. This is the first of webinars for the online course, those of you who are taking the online course. It's Part 1, Get Ready, Preliminary Planning. And if you are taking the online course, you're part of 3 webinars, and there are some activities that you need to do to participate and complete the course, and you'll find those in the conference room, which is on the left side of the New York State ASBO website. So first part, don't you just love it? Get ready, get set, and go are the 3 webinars that we're having for capital construction. And to tell us how to get ready, we have Marty Geiger, who's a partner with Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood. And thank you so very much, Marty, for putting this presentation together.
Well, thank you, too. Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you, Barbara Salato, for calling upon me. I just would like to welcome everyone, particularly on this Groundhog's Day. The news from Pennsylvania was that we'll have 6 more weeks of winter, which I guess is nothing unusual. I want to explain just for a moment what I do, since my mother always asks me what I do, and it may be of interest to people listening in. I'm an attorney who specializes in bond counsel work. That means that I and members of my firm work for governments. I specialize in school districts, in New York State. Our ultimate job is to give a legal opinion to a lender, to a bank, to a finance company who's providing funds to a school district for a capital project. That's what our product is, a legal opinion. But in the course of getting to that point where we deliver a legal opinion to a lender, we do a lot of work with the school district, prepare proceedings, draft resolutions, and generally provide guidance more to help a school district avoid the pitfalls which can be common to and delay capital project financing. So we have a lot of anecdotal information from watching school district projects from the beginning until culmination, which I want to share with you. But I did want to put into some context what it is we do here at Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood from the 42nd floor of the Chase Manhattan Bank Building in Lower Manhattan. Just so people who work with me wouldn't think that I am talking to myself, I have asked my colleague Dan Birmingham to sit in. He's in my office, and so at least I have someone to look at and talk to in person, because I don't see any of you, but I hope that you're all there and you're all in warm, comfortable places. Okay, getting started. Just to review, if I may, what capital projects are done for, the reasons for them. Nowadays, as we see them, to address overcrowded situations in classrooms. Of course, some of the photographs are exaggerations, but they're there to make the point. In many districts, there are too many children in classrooms, there are inadequate cafeteria and auditorium spaces, and overcrowding is oftentimes a major reason why school districts need additional space. Old and outdated facilities. Of course, again, we're looking back at 19th century facilities, but the idea is that if you haven't updated, actually some of these look like places I visited not too long ago, but I'm sure you get the point with that. Things that are broken, pipes in the ground, of course, broken windows. Of course, most districts wouldn't have broken windows of that nature, but I have that picture there to make a point. That actually is a picture of an old school building. If a window is simply broken, as you see in that picture, and the district wants to replace it and repair it, that isn't what we're talking about today. That's considered a repair project. But removing all of that window glass and replacing it with thermal pane or double pane new windows would be considered a capital enhancement, which falls under the category of a capital improvement. That's an important distinction we're making between repairing something that's broken, fixing something that's broken, or upgrading and renovating something to make it better than it was before. You have a picture of a dim-lit hallway there, which of course wouldn't be permitted under current code, and ceiling tiles which have fallen down probably due to some water drainage problem. Upgrading, of course, masonry. Most of us, if you're all in New York State, are living in a climate that is not at all friendly to buildings or to our homes. No matter what we do to maintain them, there still is work that has to be done on the exteriors, on sidewalks. Of course, in school districts, you have lockers that wear out after time, and HVAC. That's an old boiler. I don't think any of you have seen one that looks like that, but that's just to symbolize that heating, ventilation, air conditioning, plumbing, and so forth tends to require upgrading as a generational matter. We've seen projects that were done in the 70s, which are now being redone because of new technologies. Districts need or want new space, always very appealing to replace buildings which are pre-1950s or even pre-war with updated buildings which provide advancements in terms of environmental conditions, space, new learning facilities, and so forth. And of course, very popular nowadays, the idea of going green, because this is an exaggeration of the green. But we've worked in some projects that districts have used all sorts of innovative techniques to preserve the environment, to save on operating and maintenance costs. And that's definitely a factor that enters into the thinking of districts as they embark on capital projects nowadays. New programs and technology. Now, this is the future. I couldn't find too many pictures of future things because they haven't happened yet. But to give an idea of what I'm thinking about, particularly the lower right-hand corner, that little boy is working on what's known as to some as a smartboard, but not the smartboard's competitors don't call it a smartboard. They call it something else. And so a smartboard is like Kleenex. But it's not the company name. There's a company called Smartboards, and there are other companies that make a very similar product, but provides a similar utilization in learning. Computer technology and so on. Who knows what the future holds? But as a lawyer, I'm only anecdotally aware of it. Of course, architects, engineers are on the cutting edge, hopefully, and they can bring to school districts, as they do at conferences and conventions, all the latest information about what you can be spending money on to enhance curriculum and make the learning environment better for students and for those who also work in the school district. Arts programs, of course, very popular in New York State. There's always need for always room for building larger auditoriums or providing better facilities for band, for chorus, art, athletic facilities. That speaks for itself, of course. Again, many districts have swimming pools. Some aspire to have swimming pools. A major trend in recent years has been the replacement of natural grass fields with artificial turf fields. The debates rage about the benefits of that. I'm sure in your own communities you've heard about that. Transportation facilities. Many districts still, perhaps most districts upstate, handle their own transportation, have bus garages, bus maintenance facilities. But all districts, whether they run their own bus systems or not, do have to deal with traffic patterns. I found this interesting picture, the larger one on the left, about bus loops and access ways into school buildings. And there's a lot to be done to improve in most districts the traffic patterns for safety and efficiency. But one thing I noticed in my own school district when I went to vote last November, the school buses were in a safe location, just parked outside the school building. But I noticed they had their engines running I called this at the attention of the principal who was in the hallway in the school, and I said, I know they're in a safe place, but why don't they turn their engines off? Didn't anyone ever tell them they were wasting fuel and creating some noise? Oh, we never thought about that. We just know we never went outside until the school was over, and then the children were already being loaded onto the buses. So in my own little way, I might have saved 15 cents of fuel each day at my own school district. And yes, I voted for the budget. We come now to the basic part of this program, which is planning the project scope for capital improvement. This is the meat of today's presentation. The most important thing to hopefully you'll get out of it is what kind of process you have to go through in connection with a project. Now, I'm not talking about a simple project. For purpose of illustration, I have in my mind a construction project of a new school or some significant additions to schools where a lot of planning and a lot of involvement of a lot of parties is required. Needless to say, if your capital project is going to be the purchase of buses, a lot of what I say is not going to be relevant at all. You see there a picture of, I think it's a picture of a group in Washington actually, but just to describe that this is a serious process which requires a lot of research materials and a lot of time invested by the people who are part of the process. Usually a school district has an architect on staff, not as permanent staff, of course, but just the way doctors are appointed at the reorganization meeting, an architect is often appointed on a regular basis to maintain facility studies and to keep an inventory of the building needs. I believe Marianne Sadowski, who's handling a lot of the construction elements involved in a capital project, will be dealing next week with the procedure for employing an architect, what documents you use and so forth. But generally I would say that architects are selected based on proposals that are solicited, based on site visits by the board or administrators to places that the architects have worked at, and finally, and probably most importantly, based on the architect's fees. What do the architects do? Architects should survey the buildings to determine what needs to be done. I'm not sure they do that in every case because a lot of their jobs are probably specific to what you ask them. For example, using my own situation, back last summer, my wife and I decided we wanted to consider changing the exterior surface of our home from wood siding to brick. We called in an architect for some advice, and we learned in the process that the siding we had was really fine. The problem we had was that all the windows that we have worn out due to having the sun baking on them and just the erosion and wear and tear for 30 years. So our project, which wasn't small to begin with, took on a whole new element. In changing windows then, it gives one the possibility of changing the shape and size of windows and so forth. So we put our entire personal home project on hold. But that's by way of example what happens when you call in an architect to look at one thing. It could be that there is a geometric effect. One thing affects something else, and before you know it, simply changing the let's say the bleachers in the gymnasium may require that you redo the gym floor and walls and skylights and so on, public address systems and so forth. The construction manager, that's also mentioned on that page, is something that most districts with sizable projects, by sizable I just mean material in size in terms of a district, and that could be anywhere from $2 million and up. Construction managers often come in to give cost estimates to supplement the work done by the architect. But more important than giving cost estimates, the construction manager functions during the implementation of the project as the overseer, watching every bit of pipe or brick or blackboard that's installed in your facility, make sure that it meets the specifications, it's what the district ordered, and that it's installed properly. I'm aware that some construction management companies have had to keep their staff on site in trailers all night long to prevent rogue contractors from trying to install PVC or other dangerous types of piping in the middle of the night, unbeknownst to the school district. Of course, that's a unusual example, but it does show what can happen in a project that's not being supervised. I mean, the school buildings are owned by the public. Those of you who work in the school districts are overseers of them, but we don't necessarily treat the school district as we would our home. Obviously, if you're doing something in your home, you'd watch it like a hawk. You need a hawk watching your school district projects, and that's what the construction manager does. In lieu of a construction manager, some districts use a clerk of the works. Some districts use their own business official. If the business official has a particular expertise, affinity, or interest in monitoring the project in extensive detail. But in any event, as owner, you need to be represented, and that's what the construction manager generally does in a construction project. Some districts find it very useful to put together a facilities committee. This can be controversial in some places, but generally, in my experience, it's very useful to involve members of the community, administrators, board members, old and new, current and past board members, civic leaders, residents who are experts in areas of law or accounting or building, architecture, as well as other volunteers. The purpose is that some boards don't necessarily have or want to be seen as having the ultimate expertise in putting together a building plan. There can be disparate members of the community who in the past have registered negativity in district activities, and so by bringing everybody under the tent, the possibility is more likely that you can get more people buying into the project, becoming advocates rather than opponents of it, and ending up with something that will be favorably accepted by the time the voters need to vote on it. This is a very peaceful-looking group. I've never attended a facilities committee meeting to my recollection, but I've attended board meetings where the facilities committee has been present to deliver a report. Each district will have a different view on this. Some districts do not have these committees. They have the expertise in-house. Others do. It varies from place to place. As far as resident experts, that's always a bit of a quandary. Sometimes the resident expert wants to be the project architect or wants to be the financial guy or the lender. You have to steer a fine line between soliciting the advice and counsel of people who have expertise in those types of professional areas, but nonetheless going through the normal processes of competitive bidding and using firms that have the experience, particularly with school districts, in terms of architectural work. School districts generally should use architects that have experience working in school districts, not necessarily the local architect who otherwise has done work in the community. But as a local issue, it doesn't cause a problem in too many places. It has where the local architect is also on the board. But again, those matters seem to take care of themselves after a matter of time. The facilities committee generally works collegially. They weigh alternatives. That's very important to have. They weigh alternative possible projects, document their work, and prepare a report to the board which describes what their mission was, what the alternatives were, and what their recommendation is. On the next picture, you see a little photograph. Someone said, "What?" Originally, I didn't have his name where I figured his face would be recognized, but evidently not. That's the new commissioner of the Department of Education, and that, of course, is a picture of SED. Many of you have been there or will be there sometime, or near there. Contact SED early in the process. Always let them know what you're planning. They have a lot to say. They ultimately approve whatever projects you're doing, and there is much that can be gained from keeping them involved in the process from the earliest time. For instance, they will assign a project manager. SED has a process. They assign a project manager to each school district for a project. That project manager becomes the point person at SED for information, for delivering documentation and getting the information and approvals that are ultimately required. SED can verify what projects are aidable. By aid, I mean the state aid which the state pays to school districts to offset costs of building projects. They can provide information about local cost allowances. By that, I mean is there aid in each district. Certain costs are eligible for aid, certain are not. The costs downstate in some districts may be higher than the costs upstate in some districts to build the very same thing. So the state takes that into account in determining how each school district will receive aid. Many districts will try to design a project which maximizes the state aid, keeps the cost allowance within the limit, and tries to build facilities that all will qualify for aid. Just by way of example, in some districts, building an auditorium just for visitors to come and listen to concerts and so forth might not be aidable. But if the auditorium seats are equipped with fold-out desks, then the space can be used for study hall, for classroom, for curriculum purposes, and then SED might consider that space as eligible for building aid. It makes a big difference when you're building a project like that, whether you're getting building aid on the auditorium or not. Try to get information that you seek from SED in writing. Try to get it yourself. Get it firsthand from the horse's mouth. Many districts will rely on architects or construction managers to deliver information about what SED will or won't provide. It's always best to get the information directly from your project manager. Best to get it in writing rather than rely on someone who might have heard it incorrectly, and who doesn't have quite the stake in the ownership of the project as those who are employed by the school district directly do have. Moving right along to one of my favorite topics, the environment. Several decades ago, New York State passed a law that requires all public entities to review the environmental elements of a project they're planning to embark on before they embark on it. Why is this? This is to protect the environment against encroachment, against pollution, against anything that can hurt water, air, to avoid noise, to avoid flood, all sorts of potential environmental impacts. It's incumbent now on every school district to follow this law. It's known as CCRO, which is a kind of horrible acronym, but that's what it goes by. Some people leave off the A at the end, but that's what it stands for. If you've been around school districts for any period of time, you've no doubt heard of that, CCRO. That's what is it? It's a law. What does it require? It requires the Board of Education to review the environmental impacts of a project that it plans to undertake. You see in the next page, you see the scale where the district's evaluating the project, the scale where the project's on one side and the environment's on the other. The Board of Education is lead agency. That's a technical term under the CEQA law. Lead agency means the agency that makes determinations. And what determinations are we talking about? The board has to determine whether the project will have an adverse impact on the environment. Now, you may think that some projects wouldn't have an impact on the environment. We have districts that plan to install night lighting around the outdoor tennis courts so that people can play tennis at night. That becomes a major environmental issue in many places because the neighboring homeowners don't want to have or don't want to deal with what they perceive as the intrusive lighting reflecting into their windows opposite the tennis courts in the evening. That can be a problem. Any project that approaches the buffer line between a school district and neighboring parcels, particularly if they're residential parcels, can raise problems. projects that result in the removal of trees or the erosion of grass or empty space tend to be troublesome to the community. But mainly, the types of environmental issues that the law is addressing deal with the way the project will affect air quality, the use of water, the disposal of water, drainage, traffic, parking, noise. How does secret get done? Obviously, boards don't necessarily have the expertise to make evaluations as required, the technical evaluations as may be required under the law, so they look for help. There are firms of environmental engineers all over the state who are employed, especially by school districts and other government entities, to evaluate the environmental elements of proposed projects and come up with their results. Sometimes they have to dig into the ground, do test borings. You may be buying some land for an addition and not realize that there were oil tanks buried beneath the land. That happens frequently, unfortunately. They look at soil conditions, air conditions. They study the flora and fauna resident in the district. They look at anything and everything in order to advise the board as to the environmental impact of a construction project that the board may be contemplating. Very interesting work that they do. And the point of it is to have a probative value so that the Board of Education considers in advance of acting what impact its choices are going to have on the environment of the school district. Probative value. Unfortunately, many school districts, many people seem to view compliance with this SECRA law as a nuisance, just something to be done with. And I can't recall being at too many board meetings where the board has debated, discussed the findings of the environmental expert that they've employed. Whereas they should consider it exactly, and they read it and carefully analyze what impact the project would have. But I don't see that happening too much, and it disturbs me that the environmental law, while being followed, is not being regarded with any real significance. It's lip service that people pay to it, and unfortunately, the price that's paid is perhaps not achieving as environmentally friendly projects as one could participate in. But be that as it may, it's a requirement. It's also a requirement, by the way, not just for projects you end up bonding. It applies to any facilities project, whether it's funded from capital outlay or other sources or Excel money. Some people think that the SECRA law only affects school district bond issues. It doesn't. It affects and applies to all official actions taken by a school district in connection with facilities. Having said that, it shouldn't be a deterrent to doing the work that you need to do, and in many types of projects don't require extensive findings. There are projects which we would call environmentally neutral, but nonetheless, that determination of impact on the environment must be made regardless of the nature of the project that the school district is embarking on. Moving to the next little picture here. How is your project to be funded? How is it to be funded? Are you going to use capital outlay? By that I mean money that's provided in the budget or provided in a series of budgets over years that's earmarked and encumbered for a project. Or is the district going to use reserves, money as a piggy bank there? Piggy bank, money that's held in reserves such as a capital reserve fund. There aren't too many ways that districts legitimately reserve money for capital improvements. A capital reserve fund is the best and perhaps the only one I know. There are some districts have, by the way, just anecdotally, set up things like debt reserve funds, and for which the controller has, in audits, has criticized them for setting up things like debt reserve funds to store away money to pay debt service on future projects, none of which have been yet approved by the board or the voters. Districts have done all kinds of things. A lot of that shows up in the controller audits of school districts, which are freely available for public inspection, and make for very interesting reading and learning on the internet. Well, if you're not going to use capital outlay reserves, there's Excel, which is a grant program, a reimbursement grant program, other funds, perhaps federal grants that some districts obtain for certain purposes, and what we work with most of the time, obviously, bonds. They come in all sizes. Small bond issues, large bond issues. Anyhow, be that as it may, a picture tells 1,000 words. All right. The bond issue project plan. The bond issue project plan is a writing. It is what the district comes up with after working with the architect, the construction manager, the facilities committee. It is a detailed resource. We call it the Bible for the project. It describes the work intended to be undertaken, and it gives the costs of that work. The costs, of course, are based on the scope of the project. In most cases, the project plan will describe building by building, most inch by inch, what is intended to be done. It describes new construction, reconfiguration, changes to technology, code requirement changes that might affect HVAC, lighting, floors, other surfaces. And it is a descriptive tool that will guide the future, basically anyone who comes into the school district thereafter, to understand what the district was planning to do with the money that it was planning to spend for its project. It is an extremely important document. It needs to be approved by the board, and it needs to be available for public inspection. Too often we've seen school districts who have worked for months and months on some kind of capital project. We'll ask them to send us the capital project plan, and what do we get instead? We get a sheet of paper, one sheet of paper that the school business manager has quickly whipped together, where it just broadly describes things like elementary school addition, athletic fields, a few other broad categories, and arrives at one big cost. And there's no detail. There may have been detail in the manufacture of those numbers, but there's no detail that's evident in what's presented to us and then what's likely presented to the public. And that's not good enough, because everything else fails. You've got to be able to have some documentation to show your successor business manager or a successor board, whoever it is may come into the district to inquire, including a taxpayer, what exactly the project is. You're saying in addition to the elementary school, how big an addition is that going to be, and where's it going to be situated, and how many classrooms, and what is the cost for that, and what else does it involve in the existing part of the building, and will it have its own boilers, and will it be freestanding, and on and on. There are a lot of questions that go into that. Athletic facilities, well, that could mean an interior gym. It could mean an outside football field, bleachers, all sorts of things. The project plans need to be detailed in terms of the scope, and they should have costs identified in connection with each item of the work that's planned to be done. And some will say, but we're not allowed to draw up detailed plans and specifications for the project until after the voters vote. We all know that. Absolutely, that's true. But the project plan is the roadmap. It is the idea. It's the concept of what the project should be. And regardless of whether the voters have voted or not, you can still identify which corridors you're going to put new lighting in, which windows you're going to replace, which ceiling tiles and what classrooms and what buildings you plan to replace, what additions you plan to put on. There's no way to come up with a cost unless you have the detailed work. That's something we advise clients to do and it usually turns out to be most successful for them when they do that, because they know then what the work project is. They are able to communicate that in detail to the public, and it gives a sense of responsibility to the overall bond issue when everyone knows what is going into the project. It's not left vague. It's not left to be determined on a future date. So as you see on this page, I've just really encapsulated what is I've said. The bond issue project plan should describe the scope. It should provide a detailed summary of costs, be approved by the board, and be available for public inspection. Also, and we recommend this where possible, the project plan should consider that between the time the board has acted to approve it and the time the project gets implemented, there could be significant changes in state mandates, in the local enrollment needs for the school district. And by the way, in connection with enrollment, many districts planning to build space will have employed a demographer to study future growth in the district and make some estimates of the future enrollment. That's very important to have a demographic study behind estimates of future needs of space in the district. Otherwise, it's kind of guesswork. Demographers are have an expertise in making those kind of prognostications and are a source that you can usually rely on. Program changes. Sometimes you'll think that you'll need to be adding some sort of curriculum, and then 2 years later they change their minds and you're not. So you may not need all the space that you originally thought. And then there's technology, of course, and it's hard for many districts, for any of us, to predict with any accuracy what future technology will be, what it will cost, what it will do. I'm suggesting in this highlighted section here, this is something that many districts don't do in connection with a project plan. But it's something so useful to do because it helps avoid a lot of problems that arise later on in the process. As a bond counsel firm, we get the questions. A typical question, we set out we were going to build an 8-classroom addition, but it turns out we only need 6 classrooms. Can we do that? Or we were planning only a 6-classroom addition and we need 10 classrooms. Can we do that? Well, if those possibilities are anticipated in advance, the project plan can address them. The environmental review that has to be done can cover them, and it provides the Board of Education with far greater flexibility in proceeding with the bond issue project than if it's simply just covered these bases here. So allow yourself the time to deal with not just the shoulds, but the coulds when you're planning a project. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. It's such an important piece of the puzzle, dealing with potential deviations from what you set out to do, and by anticipating it in the project plan, you avoid the questions that arise as well. Did the public approve that? Remember, all of this that we talk about is to protect the school district from potential challenge from taxpayers and others that the board didn't get approval for the project that it's going to be building. We don't want litigation. We don't want the school district held up in some kind of legal entanglement by people protesting the spending of money. So by using a project plan, that becomes, I said before, the Bible for the project. You could point to that and say, yes, the work we're doing is covered. It's in this report. We said we were going to do it or not do it. It's covered in that. So when people question the board's authority to spend the money, if it's in the plan, and if the plan has been part of a bond issue or appropriation approved by the voters, then you've protected yourself. You've protected the ability to spend the money and spend the money for the purpose of which you intend. Critical part of this process. The bond issue project plan should also anticipate the possibility that at the end of the day, there'll be leftover money. What do I mean by this? Well, you mentioned before that the project plan has a cost. It comes up with the cost. It gives a total cost of the project. Those of you who've done projects will know that the architect or construction manager often will add and include in the project cost for contingencies, for different fees, different percentages, for overruns, for unforeseeable conditions, and so on, which can often add up to as much as 35% of the total cost of the project. In today's economic climate, many districts find that the amounts they thought they would have to spend to get certain work done are excess because contractors are bidding lower, more competitive, hungrier for the work, so that districts end up having authority to spend money available even after a project has been completed. So this slide shows a happy-looking man with money in his hands. And this is you. This is you 3 years from now when your $40 million project came in at $36 million and you have $4 million left over, and you call us up and say, you know, we left out, we wanted to do tennis courts, we wanted to build another parking lot, or we wanted to build a swimming pool. Can we spend the money that's left over on that? And of course, our answer will always be, was it part of your project plan? Was it part of the plan that you presented to the voters and for which the voters registered their approval or disapproval? So again, this is why it's important for the project plan to be expansive and have flexibility there to cover, in this instance, leftover money. Keep in mind, too many districts, in planning a project, plan it to total a certain dollar amount. In other words, dollar amounts are tossed around in the course of months at board meetings, and at some point, let's say for argument, someone says $42 million for the bond issue. That sounds like a good number. So suddenly $42 million is written in stone, and yet the project is not. The architect has to scramble to figure out what work he or she can do for $42 million. And oftentimes there's pressure on the architect to include everything, or as much as possible, everything that really probably would have cost $50 million. That's no good. That's a ticket to disaster when that happens. The architect should never be in a position of putting things into a plan that he doesn't feel there's a reasonable chance can be paid for. However, the architect can split the project into one or more, or two or more pieces. There can be what we would call the Part A, or the A-list projects, the things that absolutely have to get done and that the district wants to get done for $42 million. And then there's the Part B, or the B-list, projects that would be undertaken if there is money left over. And what are some of those projects we're talking about, the money left over? Your experience probably has been, or will be, that in the course of arriving at a scope of project, various people in the community, including board members, need to arrive at some kind of agreement, a consensus as to what the scope should be. And in the course of arriving at that consensus, different people give up different things. For example, board member X might give up his smart boards. Board member Y might give up new lockers at the gymnasium. Board member Z might give up new auditorium seats. All of those things have a dollar value and may be desirable, but of course not desirable as the Project A list, if you will. Those items can go on the Project B list and still remain as potential, plausible projects the district can undertake if there's money left over. So anticipate money left over, and money left over from the authorization, from that dollar amount, from the $42 million, whatever amount it is that your board is shooting for. Make sure that you have a plan for dealing with money that's left over if circumstances should enable you to have any left over. And nowadays, there are circumstances like that abounding. Next, we have the opposite situation. a very troublesome situation. Insufficient funds. There's not an awful lot that districts can do about this. Then this situation arises after a project has been bid out to contractors, and the board finds that the bids come in higher than expected, and it is not therefore likely that the project in its entirety can be built based on the bids that have been received. The district needs more money, or the project needs to be revised. Engineers, architects, construction manager people talk about a concept called value engineering, and that's something that they speak very highly of. They go back and they review their specifications and decide where they can cut corners and save money in building the project. That sometimes helps, what they call value engineering. And it's not a question of building with paper clips and cardboard. Somehow they manage to change building materials in some way, or buildings can get built safely and with the functionality that anticipated, but yet not cost what was originally anticipated. Then the project gets rebid, and hopefully when rebid, the budget will be satisfied. Some districts take it on their own to reduce the scope of the project. We've heard of districts that have taken a 65 classroom addition approved by the voters and ended up building only a 30 classroom addition, and because the cost of the larger addition was well in excess of the amount that was budgeted. Well, we don't think there's any real defense for that when that happens, although the district in this case argued that the 30 classroom addition was still sufficient to provide for the enrollment needs and the program needs of the district, and no one challenged them on that. But always need to be concerned that the failure to build what voters expect you to build and what could have triggered them to vote yes or think favorably of the project is critical. A prime example would be a swimming pool. Many times the district will appeal to certain segments of the community who don't otherwise use the schools to tell them, we're building a swimming pool, you can use it on weekends. And so suddenly 300 people who normally vote no come out and vote yes. Well, if it ends up that you decide not to build a swimming pool for one reason or another, you could have 300 extremely unhappy people there challenging the district, claiming that they were misled and abused, and that they were the victims of fraud. Be careful. In many cases, districts simply have to go back to the voters to get more authority, to spend more money on a project, or to have the voters approve a reduced project scope. On the next 2 pages is a checklist of things to do before you actually have a bond referendum called by the school board. They're not necessarily in the order in which they happen, but just to quickly review them. Has the board determined the project scope and cost estimate? We've discussed that. That involves the use of the facilities committee, the architect, the construction manager, board approval. Has board determined the method of funding the project? Again, are we going to issue bonds, or are we going to use reserves, cash on hand, or a combination of those various sources? 3, has bond counsel been contacted? Yes or no? Number 4, has the board contacted SED? That really should happen early in the process there. Has the board completed SECRA? Again, critical. The board must have done the SECRA work. 6, has the facilities committee signed off on the scope and cost? You want them signing off. You want to have these people there with you. You don't want them to be at odds with the board. You need them to be in favor of the project, or at least not opposed to the project. And you all know from your different communities what groups generally are disposed unfavorably towards activities undertaken by the school district. For those of you who might have missed it early on, so I see some people come into the conference here, it's important to include in a facilities committee, if you have one, representatives of various disparate groups in your community. Make everyone a participant, make everyone an owner, bring everybody under the same tent, if you can. It's a way of building consensus and having a happier result when you go to referendum. Number 7, financial advisor. Financial advisors are experts that districts hire to provide statistics and to do other chores in connection with actual financing that comes later. But one of the most important things they do is prepare tax rate impact information, which helps the district in explaining to the voters what difference will the project make in terms of your taxes that the typical homeowner pays. And I'm sure you've all seen that, those pie charts and discussions, and when it comes to budget time for sure, but when districts embark on capital projects, taxpayers want to know what it's going to cost them, 12 cents a month, $7 a year, whatever it might be. One thing to note here, the impact of a project isn't simply the debt service component or the cost of borrowing money. If you're building new space, obviously you're going to have new space to maintain. So you have the cost of maintainers, replacement of bulbs, floor wax, whatever else you use to maintain the buildings. In some cases, the new space will require new staff, teaching staff, if it's not simply replacing existing space. So to tell the voters that the project's going to cost 12 cents a month based solely on debt service is somewhat misleading. I wouldn't say somewhat. It's grossly misleading. It doesn't tell the whole story, and you need to get the story out there as to what the project really is going to cost the taxpayer, not simply the cost of building the facility, because obviously the facility is going to be there for 30 years, and it's going to remain long after the debt is paid and people have forgotten about the bond issue. The date for referendum. This is always interesting subject matter when districts want to vote. What are good days, what are bad days? When I get the question, what's a good day to vote, my answer is, of course, some supercilious, but the answer is, the good day to vote is the day when people feel disposed to vote yes. But I don't know what that date is. It's not generally July or August. Districts don't vote then, although some would like to, if they have a population that tends to move away for the summertime. Try to avoid snow days. I'm not sure, Ben Franklin's Almanac. Is that what it's called? The Almanac. But the Farmer's Almanac advises you don't vote on a day when the school's closed because of a snowstorm. We've had that happen, and we've had districts cancel votes. We've had districts nonetheless hold the vote on a snow day. That's not a good idea. It's hard to avoid. Hard to predict, obviously, if you're voting January, February, March. But the odds are it won't be a snow day. And finally, has the board considered hiring a PR firm? Some districts do that with great success. Some districts have them on retainer anyway for handling other matters dealing with the press. But you can't anticipate that the bond issue nowadays is going to require communications more extensive than in the past. You have print communications, media, and of course the online communications, which is something new, of course, but something critical. We tend to enjoy reading the online material about bond issues that districts put up for viewing. That may turn out someday to be the most effective method of communicating information than anything that's otherwise printed and or paid for and circulated by the Board of Education. All right. Once we reach this point, we're ready for the board to call the referendum. This is the stage the districts hope to get to. Of course, it's the big step before the actual vote. It's the culmination of months, if not years, of planning, of involvement, and it's often a well-publicized meeting. Press attends, and the board meets to adopt a resolution calling for a referendum on a bond issue. Of course, I say again, as I always say, make sure secret is done. That's so critical. Also, make sure there's time enough to arrange for publication of the legal notice in the newspaper. Districts sometimes forget that. 45 days notice requirement, minimum notice requirement. 2 newspapers if the district has 2 newspapers. First publication at least 45 days before the vote. Very important. So, as many of you know, have local newspapers. They're not daily publications. Sometimes the newspaper requires copy 10, 5, 8 days or something before the actual publication date. So the board can't wait till the 46th day to adopt this resolution and then hope the newspaper will have it in the following day. If you have a local newspaper, you're in better shape, but if you have, as many districts have, bi-weeklies or semi-monthlies or penny saver types of publications that are certainly not more than weekly publications, you've got to plan. You've got to plan for publication here. And again, district clerks will sometimes take care of this, but I've seen many business managers falter due to their reliance on district clerks. So when it comes to something like this, you may want to check it yourself, and you may want to at least be copied on the communications between the district and the newspaper to make sure everything is scheduled to occur when scheduled. Just to review, bond propositions don't need to go to special meetings. They can also be submitted to the voters at annual district meetings. It's perfectly okay to do it then. Many districts prefer to do it that way. It's economical. Don't have to have don't have to pay all the people who work at the polls, and don't have to have separate notices. You just add it to the newspaper notice for the budget vote, and it's efficient to do it that way. On the other hand, in some districts, they don't want to vote the same day because board members are running for election. They don't want to have to associate their names with a bond issue or to come out one way or another for a bond issue. You don't want the budget vote to be complicated by a separate ballot question, which of course is going to cost taxpayers something. Each district has a different way of approaching the question of when to submit the bond proposition. It varies from place to place. There's no answer that fits all conditions. Okay. After the board has approved the bond proposition and submitted it to a referendum, we have this period we call the run-up to the vote. The run-up to the vote can be, and usually is, just a couple of months. That is to say, it's the period of time after the board has set the date, called the election, and the election is going to take place. What happens in that period? Well, nothing at all has to happen. You just sit back and wait for the polls to open. But what often happens, particularly with big projects that have been worked on and studied and pored over for many months, if not years, districts do the following activities. Optional public hearings. No public hearings are required to be held. Districts will otherwise invite the public into regular meetings and have a discussion period concerning the bond issue. It varies from district to district. Usually there's some opportunity at a board meeting between prior to the bond issue vote for the public to comment on it or to ask questions. We've seen in recent years what we call information meetings. Sorry, I didn't mean to go up that fast. Information meetings. Information meetings, right here. Some districts refer to them as bond fairs. They'll fill the gymnasium or cafeteria one evening with tables and then invite in the architect and the construction manager, the school principals and others involved, the architect, and have each make a short presentation to the community members who've been invited to attend to describe the bond issue and its impact. I'm not sure those are nearly as effective as the next item, which are meetings with community groups. My sense about information meetings and public hearings also, just my somewhat jaded view, is the people who are going to vote no, or people who are going to vote yes, usually have their minds made up when they show up at a public event. I don't know that there are all that many people who are truly looking to be educated and have their minds swayed by something they're going to learn while attending a public meeting. And again, I don't mean to sound so pessimistic about that. I'm echoing in part things I've heard from people who work as PR people for school districts. I do think, though, again, that the meetings with community groups, this other item here which I will highlight, that's effective. We have a district right now that is planning a big election next month, and they have a calendar of meetings. It looks like the president's itinerary. At least 3 times a day, the superintendent or the business official or board members are going all over their community, meeting with any and every group in town to discuss the bond issue, its impact, of course, to try to get people interested in voting, and without saying so, of course, voting positively on the bond issue. Finally, board literature and publicity. In my own opinion, literature and publicity is fading in importance because of the impact of the web nowadays and the amount of free information that people can access and prefer to access. And then, of course, too, and I put this up in a big caution, publications have gotten districts into trouble in the past. If there's any area that we have seen pitfalls in, it's in literature that school districts prepare and send out in connection with the bond issue. It's what you say, and it's how you say it. Districts cannot spend public funds to exhort the electorate to vote yes. The problem when districts do that, and here it is. And you may not write in a brochure or submit publications paid for by the public that say vote yes. You can educate the voters. You can ask them to vote. You can say please vote. You can say please vote. But you cannot spend district funds to say vote yes. There have been many lawsuits about this. News districts tend to favor what we call propaganda. That most every district in the state will eventually send out a newsletter that has language to the effect: the value of your home is impacted by the quality of the school system. Therefore, vote on Tuesday. Every district, regardless of if it's a report card, regardless of affluence or tax rates, state aid relationship, every district will say the same thing. I personally think that's a meaningless statement unless it's supported by someone who's an expert, perhaps a realtor, who can make that statement. But it's kind of lingo jargon that every district seems to say. That's the kind of language that concerns us. We see generalizations which don't necessarily have a basis in fact. As I've said before, and I'll say it again, I happen to live in a school district, my own hometown. If they closed the schools altogether, the value of our homes would all increase because we wouldn't have to send anyone to these schools, and we could pay tuition at the adjacent district for less than it cost us per student at our own hometown school district. So in our case, the value of our homes would be increased if the school district went away. Of course, that's an exception to the rule, and I certainly don't mean to suggest that I'm not in favor of public education on a local basis, but my point is, be careful what you say in generalization. Be careful what you say about the tax impact of projects. Be careful about that. Districts have gotten in trouble by putting down estimates of tax rates which tend to be wildly out of line with what they truly are. Be careful when you make statements about state aid. Have it documented. The famous case we know of where a school district had an election overturned because it was shown that their predictions of state aid that they used to sway voters' minds was totally untrue. It turned out that the state could not give this particular school district any building aid whatsoever because the enrollment was inadequate and they were not going to be aided at a high school that had fewer than 400 students. Of course, I think a lot of the administrators actually lost their positions there. Be careful when you stuff letters in school district children's backpacks or when you print stickers or decals. As I said on the, I hope it was the previous here, don't publish or print anything unless you first check with a school attorney. Don't publish or print anything regarding the election unless you check with the school attorney. And why is that? Because school attorney is the one who will have to defend you in court or before the commissioner if you get challenged on the basis of what you've said to the voters. A few reminders. These things seem simple, but they cause problems from time to time. Usually it's the school business manager who has to arrange for voting machines. Make sure you have voting machines. Make sure they're functioning. We've had more than just one or two school district elections where there were malfunctioning voting machines. the results of which necessitated us to have a re-vote, to go back again, start 45-day process of notice all over again. Make sure the voting machines work. These are older machines. We have new ones, of course, but I understand the new ones may even be more prone to malfunctioning than the old ones. Poll workers. We have a district right now that can't find poll workers. Make sure you get your poll workers lined up in advance of an election. This is a picture, I think, of all women. Is that right? But men can be poll workers too. In my hometown, they're men and women who are poll workers. Advertise for poll workers if you're having a problem. Absentee ballots. There are precise requirements concerning the availability and counting of absentee ballots. Make sure you know them so that you don't run afoul of any of the provisions of law. We've had districts challenged on the basis of improper conduct of absentee ballots, that they didn't collect them properly or list them properly or provide information about who had filed for absentee ballots. Make sure you've checked with your school attorney prior to the vote as to how you handle these otherwise elementary aspects of an election. You do this every year for a budget vote. The same considerations have to be in place for a special election and a bond issue. People ask, how long does it take to get to a bond referendum? There's no one answer. It can take years. It can take 1 year, several months, 2 months. I would say the larger the bond issue, the longer time it takes. You need to plan carefully, be prepared, avoid minefields, but more importantly, don't rush. Districts that rush, who adopt a resolution in September for a November vote, who haven't had much time to prepare the public, to discuss it with the community, have a much tougher time of getting it passed than districts that will allow a longer time frame. Again, it changes. It varies from district to district as to how much the community has been aware of what the board has been doing, how much the project has gotten community involvement. But no one can predict, as a general matter, how long it will take any one district to go from drawing board until referendum. And here we reach the referendum. People come out and they will vote. The voters voting. Hopefully you'll be victorious. People celebrate in different ways. Of course, it doesn't always happen. Whatever you do, don't take it personally. I mean, there may be justification to take it personally, but whatever you do, don't take it personally, because the voters aren't voting against an individual, sort of not a business manager. If they vote, they don't want their taxes raised. They're not voting against you because they don't like you as the business manager. Please keep that in the forefront of your mind if you have any concerns about why a bond issue was defeated. Often there's this collateral issue, a teacher not getting tenure, a union contract not being signed, something else going on in the district can oftentimes be the reason why people are voting no. Nothing to do with the personalities or the hard work that you have been doing or been part of process to bring the bond issue before the voters. After the successful vote, the board adopts a bond resolution which bond counsel prepares. Next we go into the limbo area called the design phase. This is where projects really can go afoul. Why is that? Everyone goes home to celebrate. In the meantime, the architect walks back into the school and starts meeting with the faculty and chair people of departments to design the project. And although it was budgeted at certain levels, when the design people meet with the faculty, well, the faculty will say, well, really, a new music room. We'd like to have acoustical tiles not just the simple ones. We want Brazilian teak wood. Oh, but what wasn't budgeted for? But gee, we would like to have Brazilian teak wood. We want to have these fancy in the chemistry rooms. We want to have gold-plated Bunsen burners, and get the picture. You have to make sure that when the project actually gets designed, when the detail goes into the drawings, someone has to make sure that an eye is on the original budget to make sure that the specifics aren't going to drive up the cost. And just move quickly to this most important little page where it says, beware of scope creep. This is the big problem that occurs if the owner, doesn't watch what goes on after the vote. When the architect comes in to design the project, if you're not careful, if you don't control the process, it can get out of hand. You can end up with plans and specifications that will end up costing far more than the original budget provided. It's called scope creep. It happens time and time again. We have many, many examples of that. How do you avoid it? Someone has to watch out for the project representing the owner. The best person to do that is usually the school business official. In my experience, school business official knows what the budget was, knows what the project was supposed to be, and knows that when you start adding a lot of millwork, cabinetry that wasn't part of the original intention, that's going to drive up the cost, and you're not going to be able to get the project done as you intended to. Beware of the scope creep. And that's what it's called. Architects refer to that as scope creep. How long does this process take from bond resolution to approval is received, from referendum to the time bids are solicited? That can take months to several years. Big projects tend to be phased in, so the architect works on one part at a time, works on a part, submits it to SED, and then gets approval and then goes on to the next stage. It's as you plan it with the architect. But don't think if you have a referendum on March 15th, you're going to be able to start building on July 1st of the same year. That's highly unlikely. Allow time for everything to get done properly. Finally, we get to financing the project. Architect will give you a drawdown schedule. He'll let you know when you'll need money. You'll talk to your bond counsel and financial advisor, and then most likely you will issue bond anticipation notes or serial bonds. The bond anticipation, or before you borrow any money, you may advance from your general fund. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Under the law, a school district that has idle funds is allowed to advance the idle funds for a capital project as long as it's bondable without first bonding it. This is very easy to do. You get board approval, and you keep track of what you've advanced. You can pay, of course, the election inspectors, your publications. Sometimes you pay the architect. Districts don't necessarily need to borrow until they've accumulated a variety of costs that they need to reimburse themselves for. So you're permitted to make advances from the general fund with board approval once the project is legally authorized to be borrowed. And then, of course, you replenish the general fund by the time you need to, which is usually by the end of the year, from the proceeds of bond anticipation notes or bonds. The bond anticipation notes, in brief and general terms, are obligations that mature in 1 year or less. Historically, the interest rates on them are less than the interest rates on bonds. Bonds, on the other hand, are longer-term obligations. They can run and usually will run for a decade or two. There are different ways in which the amortization will work on them, 50% or level debt. They're sold by public sale. There are issues involving the SEC, disclosure, the IRS, arbitrage, which are the subject of a more intense and lengthier webinar that we have time for today. Finally, we get to what you've looked forward to, the groundbreaking, and then ultimately, after the project is ready, the ribbon cutting. And these are typical board members attending those two celebrations. And what do you have to look forward to? Paying the debt service, the interest and principal on the debt until it's all paid off. Pay your debt service on time. Don't damage the district's credit rating by omitting to pay it on time or delegating that task to someone else. Make sure, as business manager, you know just when the debt service has to get paid and that you are involved directly with that process. There have been some very fine school districts that have had the resources on hand and available, but have omitted to make their payments because of some delinquency or absence in the treasurer's office. So that actually concludes the presentation. I haven't looked at the questions now, but I will.
Okay. Thank you, Marty. And lots of very good information there. I'm just going to ask Michelle to let people know how they can ask an audio question. And we do actually have two chat questions that came in.
Thank you, Donna. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who would like to ask an audio question, please press the number 7 followed by the pound key on your telephone now, and you'll be placed in the queue in the order received, and be prepared to ask your question. Again, 7 pound on your telephone to ask an audio question.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. We have a question here from Alicia Coster, and Alicia says, can we get a sample of a bond issue project plan? Do you have samples, Marty or Barbara?
The answer to that would be yes. If not from an architect, certainly from a school district, there are some extensive project plans which are available online from certain school districts. But if I knew how to contact the questioner, I'd be glad to forward more specific information concerning that. I also would ask if we could provide a sample that is more in line with the type of project her district might be considering. We've seen plans which are for district-wide improvements, which can be $150 million, or plans which are for more modest scale endeavors. But yes, we have sample documents, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, they were always available for public inspection, so there's no need to foil them or to make special requests. They're public documents for each district, or should be considered public documents. So yes, the answer is yes. Be glad to provide that to Alicia.
Okay, and Alicia, we can certainly make your information available to Marty, and the two of you can have messages back and forth on that.
Thank you.
Now, Alicia also has another question. She said, I've heard varying opinions. Any pointers for when to bring on a construction manager?
Yes. My advice would be to speak to people who are construction managers and ask them that question. Ask them when they can best provide, how they best serve their clients by being brought on at the outset, in the midst, after a referendum. They will be able to provide that answer to you. Anecdotally, my sense is that the construction manager on a big project is there at the same time or within a week or two of the architect, and they work together to arrive at the cost estimates for the project. That's my sense of how that's handled, but again, I would urge anyone contemplating hiring any expert, actually, to ask that particular expert and ask members of that field how they feel they can best assist when they should be called in. I don't believe that their fee is a function of how much time they work. I think their fee is a function of how much money you spend. So if you're concerned about the time they spend as affecting their cost, I'm not sure that's a relevant consideration.
Hi, Donna.
Yes.
Hi. The only comment I can make is I find it advantageous to have them at the start of the project because they can do a reality check with what you're doing and what you're involved in, because they know the construction companies that are out there, and they know the costs that are out there because they're in the field. And I find it very beneficial to have them on board as soon as when you start thinking about having a project, just to start questioning on some things. You don't necessarily have to hire them, but you can get some information ahead of time from them that's very valuable.
Okay, that's certainly good information, and I like the idea that you pay them according to the size of your project, not necessarily on that daily basis.
Right.
One question that came to my mind when I was listening, when Marty said if you get your project planned in or approved in April, and then you said don't plan on starting it in July, what is a time frame?
It takes, once the timeline is long, I have to tell you, it does take a long time to do the planning if you do it correctly, and it depends on the state and how long timeline they have for approval of projects. So typically, if you have a project planned, let's say in May, you're going to wait until the following summer to get everything, approved by the state and to have everything bid out. So you're talking about at least a year to a year and a half.
A year and a half from referendum till approval from SED.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Everyone understands that SED is required to approve the actual detailed drawings of plans and specifications that go into your project before you can bid the project and get it built. And the architect has to draw up all those plans and specifications and can't start doing that until after the referendum.
And that, I think Marianne will be going into that a little bit in the next webinar.
Mm-hmm.
But it does take much longer than you would ever think to get to finally, as we always say, shovel ready. It's not as easy as it sounds on on TV. Have shovel-ready projects.
We have another question from Mark Coleman. Mark says, are you seeing any trends in voter response to bond proposals, especially during the last 1 to 2 years?
I'll let Marty handle that.
That's an excellent question. As you might expect, we've seen voters turning down large projects. On the other hand, we've seen voters approving more modest-scale projects, which is not typically what happens. Normally, districts have in the past had a pretty good success rate overall of getting the voters to approve projects. It's tougher now, largely because of the economy. People don't trust the state in providing aid assistance to school districts. But overall, my own personal sense has always been that projects that are designed, regardless of their cost, to convincingly address enrollment needs and program needs are far more persuasive than projects which largely are addressing aesthetic issues. So it depends on how a project is presented to the public. Need versus desirability is a critical element in the voter's mind. We're having some large elections coming up in the next month or two, actually revotes of things that are defeated in the fall. I'm optimistic they will be approved. Again, Mark, it depends on each district. The trend has been, though, in the main, it's tougher now to get large projects approved. And by large, I mean over $50 million projects that have local tax impact as opposed to projects that are largely funded through state aid. However, I wouldn't say that any district should suspend its planning for capital projects because of the current environment. I think that district by district, you have to look to see what's involved. And I mentioned earlier, some districts have suffered losses at the polls because of collateral issues which have created negativity. One district in particular lost its bond vote in December because the public was infuriated or made to be infuriated by a teachers union whose contract hadn't been renewed. And we all know that teachers unions in certain districts can be very effective in swaying public opinion on things, and that's what happened in that particular district. When they go back to the polls, I imagine they'll be after the union vote. The vote is the union has gotten its contract. I suppose the pressure will be off, and they'll prevail with the bond issue.
Now, is there a number of times that you can go out with the bond issue?
That's an excellent question too. There's not so much a limit on number of times. It's how soon one can go for the same. Generally, a district can vote on the exact same bond issue twice in the same year. If a bond issue is defeated, a district can go back 90 days later on the same bond issue. But you can't go back a third time within the same year. The idea being that a district should not badger voters into submission, so that there are restrictions on how often a district can go back. And frankly, in my experience too, I think it's generally foolish for districts to go back to the voters quickly and with the exact same proposition. It makes some sense, just as it would on a budget resubmission, to take a close look at what the voters were saying and to see if there's some area where economies can be made. On the other hand, I know a district that had a defeat in December and decided to increase the amount of the bond issue to take into account 4 months' worth of inflation that may have accrued between the first vote and the second vote. So they're optimistic going back now with a slightly 3% larger project, same work, just a higher cost, and they think that was a smart choice. Time will tell.
Wow. So you really need to know your district and your community and what's going on, and be in touch with all of those key,
I think so, and I always
community members.
I tend to think that the CHOP administrators, in particular the Board of Education, are. Some districts do rely on public relations firms to assess public opinion and to take polls and so on, to supplement their own sense of what is happening in their districts. But yes, each district is different, like neighboring districts, night and day. Absolutely.
Yes, I've seen that.
That makes it so fascinating. That makes it so fascinating. And you have so many districts in New York State.
700.
As we know. Yes.
Yes. there are no other questions that have come in. If anyone has a question, make sure to send it to us. Marty and Barbara, do you have any other thoughts that
No, but thank you very much, Marty. I
Well,
enjoyed
Barbara,
it.
Thank you, too. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that if anyone listening or anyone else who hears about this has questions that pertain to our subject matter, that we'll be glad to entertain them and follow up as best we can and as promptly as we can. Barbara and I have worked in 2 different districts now, and she, of course, was very much involved with, and remains involved with many facilities types of issues, now in a more expansive way that she deals with more or less a huge section of Suffolk County. But before, she worked at one of the component districts, and we go back a long time.
Lot of fun projects.
It's been enjoyable doing this. Yeah, some very interesting things. I remember your roof project in particular was fascinating.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank
to
you,
the both
Donna.
of you.
Thanks
now,
all for staying with us. Yes.
Yes. As a reminder, all of you who are on the webinar will be receiving a recording of today's webinar. You'll be receiving the recording as well as a video recording. And I'd encourage you to start a library with this information so that you can go back to it and refer to it. Maybe you don't have a construction project right now, but could be one in your future. And also a reminder for those of you who are taking this as an online course, we have 2 other webinars. The next one is on February 8th, and this was Get Ready. The other one's Get Set. And if you're not part of the course, you're certainly welcome to join us on these webinars. And if you are part of the course, there is an activity for you to do. Take a look at the conference room, which is on the New York State ASBO website on the left side all the way down at the bottom. And thank you all for joining us. Happy Groundhog's Day, and stay warm because we have 6 more weeks of winter.
Okay, bye. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's New York State ASBO webinar. Thank you all for attending.
The moderator has ended the conference. Goodbye. Thank you for calling.